Welcome to my video. This is a brief video on some pros and cons with rat versus hamster to help you decide whether or not a hamster or pet rat would be a suitable pet for you or your child. Hey buddy. And this is Jack. He's wondering if I have treats for him. Jack is about a year old, and yep, he's trying to see if I have food. He's about a year old. He is a Dumbo rat. As you can see, his little ears are like sideways, so that's the Dumbo trade. So in terms of cost, okay, there's no food. In terms of cost, I would say the pet rat would cost you more, mainly because you have to have more than one rat. So his buddies are actually down here. Yep, there he is. And there he is. They're sleeping. So the pet rat would cost you more because first off, you'll need more than one. Pet rats live in social groups. And one rat can cost you, a pet rat may cost you over $10, $10 to $15 each, depending on what type of color you want, what kind of rat is it that you want. Is it a hairless? A hairless rat usually will cost you more. Or Dumbo rat typically costs you about $15. Dumbos are pretty much the cheapest in terms of traits, special traits. Or you can have a regular rat like Mac right here. He's a feeder rat. A feeder rat will cost you about $2.50 or more or less, depending on the pet store. So the only bad thing, I guess, would be about feeder rats, you have to tame them. And sometimes they just don't tame well, depending on how much time you spend on it and on breeding, depending on the breeding as well. Some rats just don't tame. They'll just remain very skittish and shy for the rest of their lives. While others, like Mac, he has turned out to be very friendly. He is friendly, but now he's tamed down to the point where he would want to socialize with people. So if you go with the feeder rat route, again, they don't come socialized. You'll have to socialize and work with them. And it's not guaranteed that they will be socialized. But it will be your cheapest option to get more than one rat. If you go with a breeder, it could be more difficult to find a breeder. Breeders are not common. It was actually very difficult for me to locate a breeder near my area. I actually have to travel 3 hours out to find my closest breeder to get these two rats. And they were over $15 each. Whereas a pet hamster, I'm talking about just a Syrian hamster. I used to have a Syrian hamster named Momocho. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago from old age. So I can only speak of my experience with Syrian hamsters, or known as golden hamsters. They are the largest pet hamster that you would find in the industry. And they are going to be cheaper because you only need one. You don't typically keep more than one because they're very territorial. They're not social. By keeping more than one within the same enclosure, you risk them fighting, even to the death. So it is recommended to not house Syrian hamsters together. And the rats are the opposite. They are recommended to have buddies to be housed together, which increases the cost of the animal as well as the care, meaning you have more mouths to feed, you need more space, more supplies. So overall, a pet rat will cost you more. In vet care, usually is more or less about the same, because the lifespan that they live is more or less about the same as well. A Syrian hamster can live on average 3 years old. Mine passed away at 2.5. And the rat is similar in lifespan, on average of 3. although it is not uncommon to hear a hamster or rat living up to the age of 5. but that is usually an exception rather than the rule. In general, they would pass on the old age of 3 for both species. Hey, buddy. For both species. So for that reason, and also because of the health issues, they have very similar health issues, which I will discuss. Vet care are more or less about the same. And usually a vet exam for a pet rat is no different than the same fee amount that you would pay for any exotic, including a large reptile. For example, I would pay $75 for an exotic exam fee. That would apply to my pet rat as well as my biggest snake, king snake. So it didn't really matter in terms of species. It would cost more or less the same. So again, pet rats will cost you more just because you have more mouths to feed, you need a larger enclosure, and so forth. And that's for the cost of care. In terms of temperament, they're both nocturnal species. My rats are really active right now because I woke them up, but generally they will be sleeping. I don't let them out till nighttime. That's when they're most active. So rats and hamsters, Syrian hamsters, are nocturnal. They're most active at night. They don't really come out and do anything till nightfall. Hey, buddy. So if you're looking for something to play with during the daytime, then both species would probably not be suitable for you. Even if you, though, for pet rat, I guess if you wake them up during the day, they're actually more okay with it. They're more tolerant with that. Whereas some Syrian hamster can be a little cranky. They can be a little bit cranky, and they're more independent in a way where they don't, some of them may actually nip you for bothering them. Like for mine, if I woke my hamster up for some reason, he is very reluctant to interact with me. And while the hamster is, they don't really bite, they will nip if you push them hard enough. So for temperament wise, the hamster, the Syrian hamster, again, Syrian hamsters, in my experience, I had other hamsters. I have the dwarf hamsters. I had the Chinese hamsters when I was a child. I was bitten more times by the Chinese hamster than I ever was by my Syrian hamster. Golden hamsters or Syrian hamsters are very, very reluctant to bite. They're a good size to handle, and even though if you make mistakes, they really don't want to bite. They really don't want to bite. I never have bitten by Momocho once, except for a curious nip, like he's trying to figure out whether or not I have food in my hand, and that didn't even hurt. Pet rats, on the other hand, are just as good. They are very, very, they're, even for feeder rat, they're very unlikely to even want to bite people. They're very easy to handle. So if you worry about being bit, between the two, even though Syrian hamsters are less likely to bite, I would say the pet rat is almost guaranteed that it won't bite. Again, personality will differ, individual will differ, but 99% of the time a pet rat just won't bite. They would maybe have this little curious nibble trying to test, if your fingers are food and so forth, but generally they don't. They're very much tolerant in handling, more so than the Syrian hamster. See, he's just nibbled me to see if I have food, but it doesn't hurt. So temperament-wise, they're more or less about the same. But if you're extremely scared of being bit, the pet rat is better and more tolerant. Again, individuals will vary. Socializing them will play a huge part in it as well. So health, in terms of health issues, both because they live about the same lifespan, they're more or less about the same in terms of cancerous tumors and so forth. Hamsters are more prone to it, mostly because the Syrian hamster actually came from a very, very a litter of, I think it was a mother and a litter of 4 to 6 baby hamsters. All pet hamsters that we know, all pet Syrian hamsters that we know today originated from that litter that was caught in the wild years ago, decades ago. Someone went into the wild, digged them up, and that was it. All the generations that you see in the pet industry pretty much originated from that inbreeding of the litter. I think they have tried to introduce new litters, new blood, maybe here and there, but it's very limited. We're talking about a very limited blood inbreeding. Sorry, very limited in terms of very variable bloodlines and so forth. So most, if you want to think of it this way, the Syrian hamsters in the pet industry today are one way or another inbred. This caused a lot of problems for these hamsters. They do have health issues. Tumors are very common. Mine actually, before he passed away, before I was even able to take him to the vet for care, in a matter of 3 days, he died after I discovered he had a huge tumor that grew in his lower abdomen. And I wasn't able to get him in on time. By the second night that I discovered the tumor, right before his vet visit, he had started having strokes and then he passed away. The stroke may or may not be related to the tumor. So that's another thing. Syrian hamsters, once they age, they have a tendency to stroke. They have these strokes. Sometimes they'll survive it, sometimes they don't. It's very, very touch and go. And mine had strokes and then he passed. So that's more common with the hamster. Again, it may be related to the inbreeding, the heavy inbreeding done to this species of hamsters. For pet rats, it's very hard to get a good view. For pet rats, they also get tumors as they get older. They also have other issues like respiratory problems. Hamsters can get them too, but it's more common with rats. It's more of a big issue with rats. And for the Syrian hamster, they also have something called the wet tail. That can be caused by stress. Wet tail is like it's their gut flora have issues due to stress. It's very, very, I guess, strange in a way. I never really, you usually get that gut problem with bunnies, but for hamsters to have that, they do have it. It's a Syrian hamster does have the wet tail syndrome. So when your hamster's completely stressed out, either due to bad husbandry, like the cage is not cleaned enough, or they're constantly stressed out and not given any time to relax and calm down, especially after coming into a new home, they can get wet tail, and wet tail can kill them. So that is something pet rats don't have. Pet rats don't have the wet tail issue. And you can learn more about the pet rats health care and so forth in my other video regarding how to take care of pet rats. But for both species, they do have health issues. They both, as they age, especially as they age, they will have health issues. They live about the same lifespan. And the difference really is that the Syrian hamster will probably have strokes. I'm sure pet rats will probably get them too as they get older, but it's more common within the Syrian hamster species. So that's for health issues. But generally, both species are pretty hardy. They're pretty hardy. They can handle a lot that you throw at them. A lot of these health issues are really nothing much you can do. It's more of a matter of genetics and age. And you just treat the symptoms. Some of them just can't even be cured. So you're gonna have to check with your vet if you ever come across any health issues. For caging, it's very important in terms of caging. Syrian hamster, I guess, would be you would have probably either the hardest time finding proper caging for a Syrian hamster or the easiest time, depending on how you look at it. For pet rats, you can purchase a critter nation cage like this one. It's online. You can buy this online. You can find it. This is a recommended size for rats. However, for Syrian hamsters, almost all the caging supplied by pet stores are not adequate. They're way too small. The tubes are terrible. Your hamsters can get stuck in the tube and hurt themselves. Don't buy those cages in the pet stores. They are not big enough. They are not big enough. They will need the floor space as big as this bin right here. That's how much space a Syrian hamster will need. In a way, they actually need more space than a rat. Except that pet hamsters don't really climb. Rats do, so they make up for it. So what do you do to get enough? What do you do about how do you house a hamster? So you would probably have to buy a tub. Buy a sterilite tub with this much floor space. A big sterilite tub. You have to drill holes for ventilation, and you may even have to cut out the side and put a mesh for additional ventilation, because ventilation is very important for pet rats as well as hamsters. That's what I did for my hamster. I had to buy a tub in order to house one hamster. Remember, you cannot house more than one hamster per enclosure. So you may have to do extra work on your own. So in a way, it is cheaper than buying a Critter Nation cage, but you'll have to do the extra legwork to make it work for your hamster. You'll have to do some work and pick up some things at the hardware store. Now, one thing I want to mention about, especially when it comes to cleaning, and I like this about Syrian hamsters, they always pick a spot to pee on. Syrian hamsters will mark in one corner of the cage, similar to a leopard gecko, but they will poop everywhere as they walk as well. They constantly poop. I mean, both species, they constantly poop. That's, they both poop. But the pet hamster will usually pick one spot to pee. So you can spot clean that one spot every day and then clean the full cage, twice or 3 times a week. Pet rats can be trained to use the litter box. They were litter box trained until I just give up because they still poop everywhere. It's just that's what they do. They mark as they walk, so they would leave a little bit of urine here and there. They also poop here and there. While the litter box may carry most of their poop, you can train them. They still do it everywhere that they go, here and there. So I just gave up. I'm like, forget it. What is the point? I must as well just clean the whole darn cage, So you can train your rat, but understand that they will never, ever, ever, ever stop pooping or peeing outside the litter box like a cat does. They will as they walk around, especially in a new area to mark their territory. It's just something that they do. Similar to the pet hamster, they poop as they walk as they poop. It's just a thing that they do. And also about care, when it comes to food, their diet is actually pretty similar. They're both omnivores. So you'll have to feed some meat to your pet hamster as well as your pet rat. What you don't give them is, I don't recommend giving them things like fatty foods and so forth. You can actually feed your hamster scrambled eggs, just as you can do for pet rats. Sometimes I actually give them insects. I rather give them insect protein rather than human protein because it's more lean and less fat. Don't give them seeds. Do not give your pet rat seeds. Do not give your hamster seeds. It's very, very fattening for hamsters. It serves very little to no purpose. You're better off just buy a pack of freeze-dried crickets and give them that as treats. Crickets are a good source of protein for them. Freeze-dried crickets. Yes, guys. You have snacks later. Every single day for both species, you can give them a mix of vegetables, fruits, Sometimes I add a little bit of pasta in there. You can also sometimes give them dry kibble, dog kibble. Sometimes as a treat. But every day you can give them fruits and vegetables for both species. So diet-wise, they're very similar. Just make sure they can eat it safely. And you supplement their daily feeding with bags of food that's provided at the pet store, like Oxbow. I use Oxbow for both my rats and my hamster. Oxbow hamster food and Oxbow rat food. So you would supplement the treats and the vegetables to that food. In terms of handling, I guess most important is what, people would want to know is it easier to handle a pet rat or pet hamster? It depends on how socialized they are. Again, it all comes down to personality. Some pet hamsters are so good at handling, while some pet hamsters are not. Pet rats are almost always easy to handle. They're really less likely to bite. So again, just do your research. If you're getting it from a breeder, even better, because the breeder would know the temperaments. They will breed for temperament, and they would know their animals best. To find these animals, you may have more difficulty finding a pet rat, again, in your area. More than likely, you'll have to find a breeder, or if you're willing to take the chance with a feeder rat, you can find it at a reptile store. But generally, it can be difficult to find a pet rat for sale. Hamsters, however, it's much more common. You can find them pretty much in every pet store. You find them in PetSmart, Petco, Pet Supermarket. They're pretty common, and they have more variety, availability. Like you have the long-haired Syrian, and mine was a black bear Syrian, meaning he was just all brownish black in color with a little bit of white. So you have that variety, you have choices for hamsters. Pet rats, you may have some difficulty locating one near your area. My overall suggestion is, if you have the space, if you have the space, and I would go with the pet rat, just because I find a pet rat more willing to interact with you than a Syrian hamster. But that's just my experience. I could be wrong. Even though my hamster was very sweet, he'd rather do his own thing. In my experience, pet rats are more willing to approach you. And these are not my first rats. I had pet rats before. And, my last rat was a lab rat, actually. He was a rescue, and he was extremely friendly. Even though he lived in a lab, and he was an experiment for school, and he didn't really serve any purpose other than, being an experiment item. And when they were done with him, they were going to feed him to a snake, and I just took him home as a pet. And he was great. So in my experience, pet rats are just easier to work with, I guess. They're more willing to socialize with you. They should be sleeping right now. If this was my Syrian hamster, he would be ignoring me. But they're willing to wake up, stay up, and interact with me. More so just to see if I have food. But again, you will need the space. You'll need more than one rat. There's all these extra things you have to do for a pet rat. Whereas a hamster, you really just need one. You can get more than one, but you can't house them together. And you don't need as much space as you do for a pet rat. In terms of cost, they're more or less the same. But I think pet rats will cost more just because of the caging and because you need more than one. So I hope this video had helped you in making your decision. But that's just my opinion. Thank you for watching.